So let's get familiar with some places now. So we've got some people in place. We're getting to kind of put some faces behind some of those names. I always find that helps if you've got something to imagine, a face to imagine. We're also going to need to kind of understand the places to some degree as well. So outside the city, there's the Mount of Olives and there's Bethany as well. So Jerusalem, let's think about Jerusalem. Modern estimates make the population range between 40 and 120,000. So it's a big city by Roman standards. It's probably closer to the 40, I think. Very few. There are only 2 Roman cities that are over 100,000, I believe, at this period. If you don't count Jerusalem, 2 other cities. So it would mean if it was the 120, it's in the top 3 size cities in the world at the time. It's probably slightly closer the other way. But actually it's estimated that between 250,000 and maybe even up to 2 million. I think Josephus puts 2 million, but he's thought regularly to have overestimated. So, but somewhere maybe around the million mark, if you kind of take a middle range, all come crowding in for the million is not unreasonable. The Jewish diaspora was enormous. Those of you that did the program I did a few weeks ago, looking at the spreading flame, it's been estimated now by several different historians, not with any religious reason behind it, but 10 to 15% of the entire Roman population was actually part of the Jewish diaspora. They were incredibly fruitful and they stuck together. They didn't kind of intermarry and disappear and dissolve. So that as a result, they represented 10 to 15% of the entire population of the Roman world. And under the Roman peace, a huge chunk of those can come back each year. So you can understand why such a big crowd comes, which of course is ideal for the birth of the church at Pentecost. So that's Jerusalem, which is a couple of miles away from Bethany, where Jesus is going to be staying for the week. Less well known, I'm going to introduce you to the Tyropoeon Valley. I put there, blessed are the cheesemakers, for those who recognise the cultural reference. I say cultural reference. It's a quote from Life of Brian, where someone mishears Jesus as saying blessed are the peacemakers and hears him saying blessed are the cheesemakers. But there's something that I think is slightly amusing is the Tyropoeon, however you say it, actually means cheesemongers. So now the Valley of the Cheesemongers, the Tyropoeon Valley as it's called, was that which we told you before, distinguished the hill of the upper city from the lower and extended as far as Siloam. For that is the name of a fountain which has sweet water in it, and there's great plenty as well. This is Josephus describing Jerusalem. So if you put that, actually, I'm going to go back. Let's go back a couple. So you saw where it. Here you go. You see. Actually, let's. There you go. Can you see my little red marker? You see here it is. This valley that runs kind of, it cuts the hill on this side from the hill on the other side. So you got a hill on both sides. And so the smarter people lived on the hills. The everyday people lived in the valleys. Oops, hang on. So the pool of Siloam, just because they've mentioned it, doesn't really come into Jesus' story, but you can see it's there right down at the bottom near the gate. It's near a gate called the Dung Gate. Of course, remember at the Feast of Tabernacles, just before this, Jesus has healed he's healed the blind man there, hasn't he? On his way out from the temple. So Hezekiah's prepared Jerusalem for an impending siege. He kind of set the thing up. I go skip through here quite quickly. We read about how he kind of he actually drains the water from the city of David into a big pool, mainly because they didn't want for the water to get out, which would then become a resource if they got besieged. But it goes back to Hezekiah, so the end of the Old Testament. So part of that valley defines then what we think of as the lower city, which is where regular housing and trade takes place, and this is where most of the markets are as well. So the lower city, after travelling, you could stop and rest at one of Jerusalem's many taverns or restaurants. This is describing the lower city. Do you know, frustratingly, did this several years ago, and for some reason, so I can't tell you what my reference is. It will be someone like Josephus, but frustratingly, I didn't put it on the slide. Jerusalem's numerous craftsmen have for a long time been organised into professional groups, and most of them worked in public shops. Or it might have been a historian writing about it, actually. They live in clustered houses in a particular section of the city. They usually they actually have their own synagogue. So if you're working there as a fishmonger, you went to the fishmonger's synagogue. If you're working there as a carpenter, you went to the carpenter's synagogue. You get the idea. So in Jesus' time, there are 480 synagogues in Jerusalem. So there are lots of these little ones that servicing different sections of the community. Among the small market streets, there are weavers, dyers, potters, all these different things, merchants selling fruit, dried fish. The streets were always crowded, busy, especially on Mondays and Thursdays, which are the main market days. So citizens and visitors come where they can buy stuff. There are perishable goods there on sale every day, except of course for Sabbath, of course. So actually, just as a useful thing, this is probably where Jesus' family is going to be lodging. It's probably also where Peter's fishing cooperative maintain a house. We're going to read about Peter's house, and as I say, church tradition tells us that it's part of the fishing business that they maintain it. So there's Peter and his brother Andrew. Sitting by their fishing house, and here these are various members of Jesus's family. Looking at them, there might be more members of Jesus's family than you were expecting to see. So just kind of whet appetite. We'll discover a bit more about some of those members of Jesus's family as we go on week by week, because several of them come into the story. But this is probably where they'll be lodged, around this area. Over to the side, there's the Essene quarter. So again, let's just put this. So around this area here, where I'm just kind of moving the pointer, which is the Essene quarter. We're pretty confident of that. It's actually one of the markers that, from an archaeological point of view, was identified nice and quickly. Pliny tells us that there are around 4,000 Essenes living in Roman Palestine. And they had a community in the desert at Qumran, so that's why we think the Qumran community is almost certainly an Essene community, because Pliny tells us about them. But 4,000 of them living in the wider area. I think there's around 50 Essene houses, I think, that were made up the Essene quarter. Just as an interesting little thing, because they play a role in the Bible that we often don't notice. It's likely that the name Essene comes from the Aramaic version of the Hebrew word chassid, which in Aramaic is chasai, which means the holy ones, which is probably where the Essene bit comes from, because they're holy ones. And the Greek version of the Old Testament actually translates the word chasaid with the Greek word eulabes, which we actually meet in the New Testament. So Simeon, at the beginning of Luke's Gospel, who's there in the temple, if you remember, when Jesus is dedicated, is referred to as eulabes, as a holy one, a holy man, which could be therefore actually a kind of a way, because the Essene is a name that seems that they weren't necessarily fully using themselves, but it's just a label that got put on them. And so the gospel writers may not think that everybody knows who an Essene is. They just refer to them as a real saint. And that's really at the heart of, I think, probably what they were driving for. They were living very austere, very kind of devoted lives. And there's a distinct group on the day of Pentecost, the word is used for, and it's the group that bury Simon in Pentecost are eulabes as well, holy ones. So they probably do play a role in the Christian story that we don't always see. And they almost certainly play a role in the Last Supper, as we'll see, because it's probably a Essene quarter where the Last Supper takes place. So there are about 50 Essene priests living in the southwestern corner of Jerusalem. So Josephus describes the location of the gate, which is why he does it quite precisely, which was actually how come it was excavated. They went and looked for it and found it. And then that was strongly supported from the findings there, because they find descriptions of stuff like covered latrines, which are also referenced in the temple scrolls at Qumran, you see. So we are pretty confident that was one of the ways we helped to anchor the kind of the geography of Jerusalem. The upper city is where the high status people live. It's just above. You can see as this. It's actually higher than the temple. Although you can't really see that because of the way that map's angled. But the upper city is actually the highest place. You got a good view. You don't have to look at the riffraff who live down in the valley, in the cheesemongers valley. You can look straight across at the temple. Nice views. And there you can see a couple of things. We're going to cover the buildings as we go through, so I just want to introduce the basic geography of the city. So the upper city was so cool because it's topologically higher. It's been built in a very fine Roman tradition by Herod. It's got large stone building blocks separated by big streets and plazas, and it's in that area where Jesus is going to be tried. So the upper city with its neighbourhood of the rich, large, elaborate dwelling places and the high priests and of the local aristocracy. Here were the palaces of the Hasmonean kings. They push out a little bit, and of King Herod and the high priest Caiaphas as well. They're all there in the upper city. So here we go. Here it is. This is where the high priest Caiaphas and Annas live. We're going to look a little bit more at the kind of priestly mansion as we think of it as we go in subsequent weeks. So at the moment, I just wanted to lay the foundation. Now we are getting. Oh look, we're at 9 o'clock, and I've got the text to get through. So the temple, of course, is the scene of all the action. Second temple was originally a modest structure, but it was constructed by the exiles after, of course, the return from Babylon. But then Herod had come along and he'd fully extended it. From 19 to 17 BC, he started the work and ran continuously from 17 BC onward. So it's really large, very grand, very beautiful. So let's tell the story.